Okay, the recording is now going again, so we'll move on our agendas. We are at number 8, which is the bylaws, and the first bylaw we have is the bylaw number 8 of 2023, capital development fees and utility infrastructure costs, and I will hand it over to our CAO to walk us through that one, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is the second reading for the bylaw. The first reading was to introduce the bylaw, and the information related with that is in all the detail that was provided last month is also provided here under 8.2 with all the details. And today I will be doing a presentation to walk through some of the details associated with that bylaw. So bylaw 8 is our bylaw for the utility rates, for the capital development fees and the utility infrastructure. So as part of our expansion of our water and sewer services, and turn our lagoon in East Selkirk into a regional lagoon, as well as the water treatment plant in East Selkirk into a regional water treatment plant, infrastructure was provided. As part of that infrastructure, there was twin force mains put in from Lockport to allow for the decommissioning of Lockport treatment plant and bring all the sewer services over to the lagoon and reduce some of our major expenses associated with managing the Lockport treatment plant, as well as we had received funding for the expansion of the water treatment plant in East Selkirk, and that required putting in force mains from East Selkirk all the way up to Lockport for future expansion of water services there. In this, Council was also advised that we would need to do a review of the infrastructure costs that were being allocated because there was more capital investment occurring as part of that project. So, as part of that, a study was conducted to reevaluate all the capital development fees and utility infrastructure charges to be not only for cost recovery, but also to stay competitive within the capital region and to provide information based on those costs of installations of those utility infrastructures. The goal was to standardize the fees as we move forward to have a fair and a consistent method for the amount to be paid for capital development fees and utility infrastructure costs by those that want to utilize those utility infrastructures. The standard practice and implementation will provide Council a consistent, fair, and equitable decisions on capital development fees and utility infrastructure charges for the RM's return on its investment from those individuals that connect to it. In the past, there has been a complete review that did occur for the development of these charges, showed that previous charges had not taken into consideration the costs of construction of previous phases as they rely on each other. So as an example, one of the phases was the construction of the water treatment plant here in East Selkirk that was supporting East Selkirk. But as we expand, there was outstanding capital investment that wasn't collected from the local improvement district because, as an example, it was oversized to be able to allow for expansion. So the expansion would be covered by additional connections. Now that it was expanded, that was taken into consideration along with any additional investments into the softening of the water and so forth. With most of this infrastructure coming in stages and also coming in different service requirements, there were 3 separate bylaws that were sitting out there that were being utilized. And so this is an attempt to eliminate the 3 bylaws so that we have one consistent bylaw that shares and communicates the information correctly for our anybody that's coming in to do development or anybody that's coming in to do a connection, because there was a separate charges for East Selkirk, there were separate charges for South Lockport, and some of the charges were related with just sewer, while in East Selkirk there were charges related with sewer and water, and then there was also a separate bylaw for capital development levies. So all of that has been combined together into one. So the 3 bylaws have different utility infrastructure charges, and some of the charges were based on the area in the RM, as I mentioned. The costs of the curb stop was also identified. Originally, when it was done, when the work was done in East Selkirk. It was done through a local improvement district, and as part of the local improvement district, the curb stop was included as part of that local improvement district. And it was built into the bylaw for future charges, but with the inconsistency or price escalation that continues to happen on construction inflation, we took a look at it and said, should the curb stop be included as part of the charge? And we discovered that, especially when it came out in Henderson, that definitely showed that there's the actual cost of bringing in the infrastructure, and then there's the cost for installing curb stops, which fluctuates due to construction inflation. We examined every other municipality in our capital region, and curb stop charges are separate, the responsibility of the property owner, as opposed to being built into the cost of connection fees as they were established. The current standard for the capital region, users who want to connect to the system, they are responsible for those curb stop installations, as you will see in East St. Paul, West St. Paul, St. Andrews, Brokenhead, any of these municipalities showed that they were all charging for the capital cost. And that makes more sense as you move forward, because you know what the cost of the major trunk lines, major treatment plants, and so forth, what they were to install those services, and then you can determine an actual cost for the number of users those can make available. In curb stops themselves, people may connect in 2023, and somebody may connect in 2033. That 10 years can have quite a bit of a price escalation, and that shouldn't be, it doesn't make it fair for all individuals as you move forward. So we've recommended those changes. Research was completed from studying bylaws from all other municipalities in order for the RMS St. Clement's rates to be competitive in the capital region, and determine how those fees were calculated and what was included in those fees. The detailed analysis was done, and the examples of those municipalities has been provided here. This is probably one of the first complete studies that has been done in the capital region to this extent. We've also shared our findings with all the CAOs and the other municipalities who have confirmed their charges and who will now be able to utilize this information. Now we can have a sort of a standard look that hasn't really existed in the capital region to this extent. So in looking at this, there's basically two parts to it. One is a capital development levy, and the other is utility connection fees. And depending on which utility you're connecting to, capital development levy fees are fees that are established for the impact of the new development on existing infrastructure, such as roads, parks, land drainage, fire services, and other municipal services. So some municipalities call them impact fees, some municipalities call them development charges, or a capital development levy, as we have established in the RMS St. Clement's. Consistently, they are applied throughout all municipalities. The capital development fees are necessary to maintain the existing infrastructure in the future. So the example is there's an existing road already existing in where somebody comes in to subdivide. Now there are going to be more people utilizing that road, so there was an investment that the municipality and the taxpayers had originally invested in that infrastructure, so the capital development levies help to sort of offset that cost. These fees help to fund the growth, because as growth occurs, there's demands for services, there's demands for maintenance of those roads and those areas, parks. As an example, also for fire departments, that you may need to buy more equipment, may need more firefighters and more responses, which has an impact. And so these fees help to fund the growth and the extra services that the ratepayers would require due to increase in population. And these are intended for new subdivisions only. And so the review was conducted on these capital development fees from other municipalities, and a comparison chart was created from the 9 neighboring municipalities that are mostly in the capital region. So we did a comparison of all of these. The comparison showed the capital development fees ranged anywhere from $2,300 to $6,100 for non-service lots. with Springfield being the lowest and West St. Paul being the highest. And so there's the range, and within the range, there's many of these. We took a look at our fees, and our new bylaw proposes a net increase of $500 from what it was previously. And that's $750 was added to go to the fire. So what we ended up creating this year was part of those fees would also include money going into the fire reserves. As council has had multiple discussions in the past that we have fire equipment that's now ranging in millions of dollars, and council has been putting some 333 from the previous term of council to the term before it. I can't remember now. I think it was the previous term of council that decided to put $333,000 every year in the budget into the fire reserve in order to fund for this equipment by cash. And that has not been able to keep pace with the demand for this new equipment. And as we've been adjusting our requirements, we felt it was important that anybody that's coming, anybody that's subdividing, and there's new residents coming in, that they are, or there's subdivisions that are also helping to contribute towards that. So there's a fee of $750 added to that. And then the capital improvement reserve was decreased by $250 because we felt that there's capital improvement reserves that are just needed for doing the capital improvements, such as maintaining the roads, resurfacing and so forth, but we're already collecting fees associated with utilities and other things, so that allowed us to be able to separate them properly. So there's a net increase of $500. The levy goes as per bylaw, $2,000 for the capital development reserve, utilized for capital projects that are related within the RM. Fire reserve, utilized for fire protection services for $1,000. And road reserve fund utilized for existing road maintaining and rebuilding those roads is another $1,000. And recreation reserve, $500. And environment reserve, which is related with solid waste and sewer infrastructure and so forth, for $500 for a total of $5,000.
Councillor Spicer has
Quick
a
question.
question.
So this is an increase of $500, which is approximately 10%. When was the last time these fees were increased? Do you remember what year our bylaw was? 2018? Is that right?
2014 is the capital development levy bylaw.
Okay.
So it's been a
Just to
long
put
time
it in
since,
context.
it's been a long time since
inflation.
these reviews have been completed, yes.
So it's reasonable to increase.
Yes. So with that covers the cost of the fees related with new developments that are coming in. Along with that, there was the water and the wastewater. On the water utility connection fees, we took a look at the utility connection fees, and it's based on a capital cost for the delivery of the overall distribution system, the water distribution system, what was invested as part of the capital investment, and then it's determined by the number of connections you're able to generate from that, and those connections are paying their equitable share as part of it. So the taxpayers may initially do the investment in bringing the funds in, but then it's paid back to the RM into the reserves so that it's recovered. And the intent is to recover it to the best of your abilities and based on budgets. So in our water treatment plant and for the expansion of turning into a regional system, it was identified that $2.25 million was for the force mains. Now we received $2,250,000 as a grant as well. So the estimated cost for bringing the force mains to Lockport was $4.5 million, but the actual borrowing that the RM has done is $2,250,000. There was also the expansion of the water treatment plant, which was just recently completed, and it came in at $4,350,000. Of that, $2,175,000 was a grant for the Manitoba Water Services Board, so that's taken off of that cost. And then in that, there was a contribution, so the utility ratepayers also paid for the expansion, for the existing users were paying for turning it into soft water. And so $1 million was allocated from the utility rates, and then 1.175 was allocated from the RM. So that was for the upgrading of the expansion. And then what we had was a well field expansion. It was recommended as we expand this and expand it and turn it into a regional system. It was determined that the current two wells here they were too close together, and they wouldn't work well for the amount of draw that would be coming out from the wells. That we have identified another location, and this is looking at implementing well field as well as doing any licensing upgrades if necessary, as well as doing the lines and putting it in. So there's $1,500,000 has been identified for that. Along with that, as a future expansion to its full capacity would be $1 million for an additional train and pumps in the water treatment plant. The water treatment plant has already been designed to accommodate for an additional train, but the train hasn't been purchased yet, so that's been identified in there. And then there's the overall distribution of the water, of the main lines within the Lockport area, and that was identified for $750,000 as an estimated price. Lockport Water Reservoir and Booster has also been identified in here for $4 million. And this is all part and parcel of the expansion, and they're looking at sharing water with the arm of St. Andrews. And so what that will do is allow for more connections and be able to bring our investment back to us. And so that also expanded the capacity to some 2,800 units, residential equivalent units that could be. So the overall investment would be for about $11 million. So that's what your basically your costs are. $11,850,000 would be the overall investment for this entire infrastructure. And along with that, there was costs for the original water treatment plant. As I mentioned, it was expanded and it was built. You don't just build for what the existing capacity is. You want to build for a little bit larger and you collect it later. And so that was an outstanding amount of $1,629,914, which was borne by the utility rate and also by the general municipal taxes. So the part that was connected for the municipal taxes and the bylaw was put forward 50% of that funding had to be paid back, which brings us to a total of $13,479,164. So based on that and the 28 and the number of there's some 302 or 309 connections already. Subtracting that from the 2,800 came back with what would be a per connection fee of $5,395.98 per connection was what was estimated, what's been determined as a request for connection to the services. So that was the determination for that. Then there was the wastewater utility, which was the infrastructure, the work that's been done for the building of the lagoons, the building of the twin force mains and so forth. The biggest difference on this one is that it's been identified in multiple different phases, and we did an analysis based on what should be the amount in each individual phase, or should it be an overall. We determined the best solution was to do it as an overall, and as phases came in, we'd be able to then have the appropriate cash dollars to be able to invest in those phases. So the very first phase, I didn't include the East Selkirk side of it because that was already done and completed, and this is dealing with mostly the growth that was related with the twin force mains coming out and the elimination of the wastewater treatment plant in Lockport. So phase one was done when we were required to do the upgrades, and the total project cost on that was $6,591,323. The Old River Area Road portion was $833,000, and what this was, we received grants and funding. Now, of that, 833 was collected through an LID from the Old River Road area. And the remaining portion, which was all the laterals that were that were created as part of the force main, and they were included as part of that, and that was the outstanding $1,757,923,000. Phase 2 was the force main from East Selkirk to Lockport, which then would allow, because what happened was when the laterals were put in, the Lockport treatment plant ran out of capacity and it was slated to be replaced. And so we couldn't add any more units to it. So what we felt was what could be created so that if we put the twin force mains in without doing any immediate upgrades to the treatment plant and just using the pumps from the Donald Road lift station, they would generate enough capacity to be able to do 290 before having to go to the next phase. This allowed us, as soon as we put the force mains in, to make available opportunities for people to do curb stops and connect into the sewer system along Henderson. That's what's been out there, and then the local improvement district was established, and since it was done as a local improvement district, an option was made to do the curb stops. This is where we discovered the curb stops were considerably higher than what was anticipated in the past. Phase 3, which is also slated for this year, and the grant was received for $1 million, has been identified as $2 million for the Lockport lift station decommissioning, and then putting in a larger lift station for the Lockport treatment plant decommissioning, and a large lift station. Then that was estimated at $2 million, and that's what an RFP has gone out for. And finally, phase 4 was the lagoon upgrade and expansion. So this would take the lift station and the plant decommissioning will allow for an additional 260 residential equivalent units before a major upgrade is required as part of putting in an upgrade so that we get a continuous discharge into the river and put in a Sager system. The Sager system, which was originally estimated around $4 to $5 million, has gone up quite a bit in price, and has been identified as $10 million. So that phase 4 has been identified as an overall price on this, and so the recovery is identified at $16 million would be the total investment once it's all done, but that would add another 1,150 residential units. Now the intent is to recover from all of those, so taking a look at the analysis and calculating at the various connection fees, currently at looking at just phase 2, currently it's at $7,900 would be the correct fee for this time frame. But in order to be competitive with the rates within the capital region, we're recommending $7,700 as a connection fee cost, and then with a 3% increase, and by next year we'll have come close to meeting those numbers anyways. And the intent is that we would look at it. So we took a look at it, and then we also did a comparison and said, based on the 2021 census of the rate of growth between 2016 and 2021, we saw an average rate of growth of about 70 units. We know that we'll probably see a lot more of that in some areas, and we've seen some of that. But at this point, to be conservative, we've stuck with the conservative growth of 70 units per year, and giving us 70 units per year with this collection, we are able to determine that we would be able to recover all the funds that were invested in it. Obviously, right now, if you our bylaw states $1,400 and some dollars, but that was including the curb stop. So the curb stop has been pulled out, so it will be $7,700 as a recommended.
14,000.
14,000, sorry, not 1,400. Thank you.
Cheap.
And so those are the fees and the structures that we've established as part of the overall delivery process. So I could roll into the comparison, so then we take a look at the comparison of the capital development fees, and I'll have to expand quite a bit to show you the details associated with it. But when you take a look at it, as an example, these are the utility charges, and when you take a look at total capital development fees that come in, when we take a look at West St. Paul, they're in the $19,000 with those fees put together. When you take a look at St. Andrews, it's anywhere from $18,000, or for non-utility functions, it's considerably less. And so when we take a look at these costs for McDonald, most of these we see that when we get comfortable permits, we're within the range of most of these. And when we take a look at multifamily, we're considerably less, obviously, and then and if it's residential sewer only, we're less again, and then if it was water only, we'd be less again.
Go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
And I invite council to take a good look at this because I myself started questioning a few things, but if you take a look at some of these municipalities, they are on the water COLA, so water is not included in these numbers. Even if you look at St. Andrews, their number is similar to ours, but it doesn't include water.
Correct, St. Andrews has no water.
Like
And so,
they're at $18,000, we're at, you know, about the same.
or if we were sewer only compared to St. Andrews, we're at 13.2.
Yeah.
East St. Paul.
So just take a good look at
30,000.
Yeah.
this spreadsheet and because some of these, like Rosser is, their water's not included. West St. Paul, I don't think their water is included. So you have to kind of take a look at that comparison with only sewer, right?
Yes, and also you have to take in consideration as well is that in some cases, such as McDonald's, Taché, some of these services were put in many years ago. Obviously, they're collecting for what was invested. Cost, whenever you put the service in, there's a cost of the infrastructure at that point, and you're collecting for that as you go. So it's a matter of when were you able to do the investment. And so that's our comparison of the capital development levies. And so the other was the capital development fees comparison for those other fees. And so what this comes down to is green space development. And remember I mentioned that that was the connection fees for those. And we do a comparison to all the other municipalities here. As you can see, there are, we are within the range of most of them. When you look at West St. Paul, $6,100. Then you take a look at East St. Paul, $16,000. And when you take a look at McDonald's, 5,000 to or 7,500, depending on the type of lot that's being created. Springfield, as we mentioned, was one of the lowest ones.
They're
And
established now.
yes,
Yeah.
and so, but as you can see,
Well, maybe they haven't looked at their bylaw in a really long time.
that's
It
also
could be that
possible.
too, right?
Yeah.
And that was the intent here, since we had done this detailed analysis before it was work, to share with all these municipalities what we learned. And there may be some that will look at this and say, okay, let's make sure it's fair and equitable for all parties. And what it does is it also allows us to now do a proper comparison of what everybody is charging for what services. As you'll see, you know, fire, hall equipment, Stonewall, and St. Clements are the only ones that are identifying towards that
Right now.
right now. But as you also know, all the RMs have passed a resolution with the Association of Medical Municipalities identifying the cost of fire infrastructure has gotten to the point that it's having a significant impact on the tax burden. So where do you have to look at new ways of being able to, as opposed to just applying more taxes towards it. One is to look at more support from the province of Manitoba. The second is to take a look at building it into your development fees. And so, but you'll see what they're charging in the other areas, and I think it's a very deep, I think this will be very useful in the future as we continue to move this. And that's been one of the major recommendations out of this report is that at least once every 4 years, all these fees and analysis are done to look at how fast are we growing, is it accommodating, and are we doing it properly? Now, council can always ask us to do it sooner if they so wish, but we've identified at least once every term of council that all these fees, both on utility and capital development levies, should be taken a look at and considered. I can point to some other additional ones, such as Taché is $10,500 or $7,500 on a multifamily, you know, $8,000 in rock, in Stonewall. Rosser, you know, there are usually explanations when you get into some of those. Perfect example in Rosser, it's mostly residential. There's only a very small population, it's mostly all farmland. They're not looking at any much infrastructure, they're not looking at much subdivisions and growth. The only growth they have is occurring out of Centerport. At Centerport, most of the, if not all the infrastructure was put in by the province of Manitoba, not by Rosser. So that's a significant tax base for them without having to look at any other fees. And their policy is not to allow any further subdivisions. They want to preserve farmland as part of that entire process. So that's the capital development fees. Then finally we get into the water and sewer charges. So when we take a look at the water treatment costs, this was the analysis that was done, and it's been provided as part of the report, which brings forward estimated units in East Selkirk, 302 as I mentioned. That might have gone up slightly a little bit since then. 2,800 was what our the analysis was done by the engineering from WSP, and so that made 2,498 units available. When we take a look at that, that's how we determine the costs. We're recommending to go in for $5,300 and then to keep it to $5,300 in 2024 as opposed to the sewer side. Reason being that we're anticipating that the water line itself will not be completely available in Lockport until the spring of this year, and because of that, we're recommending that the fee stays the same, and then with a 3% increase, you'd be coming close to recovering your full amount. Obviously, you haven't used up all your units by then, if you're looking at 70% growth, but again, this is the best guess that you can do on your growth when you're looking at 20-year projections. Now, at any point in time, you could have somebody come in with 150 units or 500 units for a multi-family or something. That will have an impact on the number of units you have and at the price that you collected at, because then you may have to adjust in the future. That's why we're recommending every 4 years, we would take a look at these connection fees to make sure there's full cost recovery as much as possible. And obviously, if you have other projects to do, there's also further grants available. And then the grants help to reduce your costs. So that was on the water side. And finally, on the sewer side, sewer connection cost options. Similar analysis was done on the sewer side. And as I mentioned, we took a look at what the phases were, what the costs were for each one of the phases. Then we took a look at how we could charge if you were charging by phase. So theoretically, it should be at $7,900 right now. We said 77 is keeping it's consistent, and then it would have gone up to 800, and then to put the entire cost of phase 4 on only the phase 4 users wouldn't be fair, because there's phase 1, 2, and 3 that led to being in phase 4, and those are also users. How much of that could come out of the utility and all that still needs to be discussed in the future. But for the sake of budgeting, we took a look at it. We said at $7,700 with 3% increase, when we got to 1,470 units in 20 years, we would have come pretty close to recovering our full amount. So it's a reasonable number to move forward with at this point with a regular review every 4 years. And so that's the sewer side. Finally, the last thing I wanted to discuss with council was, in reviewing this, one of the last things that has come up with some dialogue with the other CAOs is that there's capital, as I mentioned, there's utility connection costs and capital charges. The capital charges are per lot fees, and that's what's been done. That's what's been mostly communicated and worked on in the RM, because there hasn't been a lot of multi-family development around here. But other municipalities have been looking at multifamily. So as an example, if you came in today and built an apartment building on one lot, you'd be paying one lot fee. Yet that apartment building could be 50, 100, 200 units, which has an impact on the system. And if these are supposed to be impact fees, they should be reviewed appropriately. So this hasn't been looked at by the RMs to any great extent. The only one that's seen some significant growth so far that I know of is the RM of McDonald, who has been seeing significant multifamily coming in, especially inside the city, and a lot more commercial, so they have identified a per unit fee. So what we're recommending today is that we give second reading, and then by the end of the month, we'll have received comments back from the other CAOs to bring something forward for council, whether you want to include a per unit fee for multifamily on one lot. As an example, and this is where the equity needs to be dealt with. As an example, if I came in and did a capital development fee, if I came in and built several townhouses on one lot, I'd be paying one capital development levy. Okay, and those townhouses could be just like single-family dwellings. Now, if I came in and did a bare land condo, which is like a multifamily, but a bare land condo, you have to go in and register each one of those parcels separately, and so they would be considered separate parcels, so I'd be paying for each one. So that's inequitable for the developer and for the RM to be collecting in that fashion. So we feel that there needs to be a review of that. We've reached out to the other CAOs, and we'll get something back that we can come back, and we can do it as an amendment to the bylaw for third reading. The only thing is, if there is a decision of council that at this point we don't want to look at making that change, you can always come back as an amendment later, depending on how many RMs are doing it, because you still want to be trying to be fair and equitable. And in some cases, there's policies related with, in order to see this level of densification, because there's an argument to the point that if there is more densification on one parcel, that's less roads you have to build, less snow you have to clear, less things. So that gets taken into consideration. Council has already taken that into consideration and has passed a policy of saying 50% of the connection fees are, so an RE, for a residential equivalent unit, they will only be charged 0.5 of the residential equivalent unit to support multifamily or more densification on lots. So the same principle could apply for apartment buildings or bare land condos kind of scenario, because you're going to be able to densify more. So those are things that are policy decisions that we have to make at a later point. That it's best for us to come back with some more information on that. And so that's the end of my presentation. Any further questions?
I'll open it up. Council members, you have questions on what was just presented?
Well done to you, your staff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the biggest advantage is that now we have an ability to compare apples to apples, and especially when developers are coming in, say, they're only charging $2,000 in Rosser. Well, you can show them exactly why they're only charging $2,000 as opposed to.
That was the point, you just said it. I think the biggest thing here is when we're throwing out numbers and we can compare it broadly to all those other municipalities, that is the right thing to do for anybody to look at. Any ratepayer having questions, just look at the comparisons that we've made with all those other municipalities. And as Councillor Spicer said, a lot of times it doesn't include water, which ours does. So to me, that really legitimizes the numbers.
Yeah, and just for clarification, it doesn't include water in their bylaws.
In their bylaws, right?
But those individuals are paying water charges as part of the co-op.
Yeah, but they'll be over and above.
Yes.
Go ahead, Scott.
The thing that I like about this is that, we know, we've done enough analysis now to know what it costs and what the fees should be. The second thing is that we're no longer working with 3 bylaws, we're working with 1. So that will assist our staff also when they're talking to developers and or anyone. You know, it can be a clear and direct message now. So I think that's important also.
So,
Okay, so if are no further questions or comments, is council prepared to proceed with second reading for bylaw number 8? And I believe that our CAO advisor will only be doing second reading for these two bylaws today.
correct, we'll do, I'm recommending second reading for bylaw, yeah, we'll do second reading for both of them because bylaw 9 is tied directly with bylaw 8. And
Right.
I'll speak to bylaw 9 right away. So I'm recommending we only move forward with second reading and we'll bring third reading in for next month, or the end of the month.
Okay, so if council is prepared, can we have the resolution for second reading for bylaw number 8, please?
Resolved, bylaw 8 of 2023 being a bylaw to provide capital reserve funds for new developments and fees of utility infrastructure buy-in charges and other fees required as part of the land development be given second reading.
Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Spicer, second, Councillor Bazarowicz. Any further discussion on bylaw number 8 of 2023? Hearing and seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Okay, so if you want to move on to number 9, or bylaw 9, I should say.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bylaw 9, what it is basically, it was tied directly with reserve funds. So it recommends is where the reserve funds come from, or where the monies come from and where the reserve funds go. And the reserves are very specific. Once the reserve is established by council, it can only be used for that specific purpose. And so, as part of this, now that we're repealing the other 3 bylaws, by the time we do the third reading, there'll be a new bylaw 8. And so in bylaw 9, what we're recommending is an update in it so that we can then update our bylaw 6 of 2016 with the items that the funds collected under bylaw 8 for infrastructure charges to be deposited in the water and sewer utility expansion reserve. So that's where the monies would go when those monies are collected. And that funds collected under future bylaws for utility infrastructure buy-in charges be deposited into that expansion reserve. So this is a sort of a part and parcel of the bylaw 8. Once we have one consistent bylaw, it used to be bylaw 14 of 2016 or 14. 16, and so that's the one that, I'm sorry, I could find it if you want the exact bylaw number, but the intent is to fix that. And so I'm recommending second reading on this, and then we'll do third reading on this as well.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Spicer.
So for clarity, bylaw 8 deals with capital development fees and utility charges.
Yes,
Bylaw 8 itself, for capital development fees, lists which reserves those fees go into.
yes.
This one is dealing with the water and sewer fees.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Bazarowicz.
And that's fees for the entire
Yes, so this will be consistently applied for all services related with our 2 regional systems, which is our regional sewer lagoon and all the connections as part of that regional system, our wastewater regional system and our water regional system. Now, we do have a separate charge because we have a satellite system for Sunset Bay, so that'll continue. But for the remainder of the RM, whoever's connecting, these will be the only charges.
Okay, so, and then if we expand into region,
Yes,
that's a new bylaw,
expand into
other parts of the region.
You're
Other
referring
RMs.
if we
Other RMs?
cross the river.
No, that would become a discussion of service sharing. similar to what Winnipeg did.
But this wouldn't apply, this is why I don't like to use it for information, but we would make separate ones for.
Yeah, well, this would say that this is what we would be charging for connection fees. But since we're doing a service sharing, there would be normally some sort of a buy-in. So if you, what I can show you as an example on the Winnipeg one for sewer connection option, or where am I here, capital fee comparison, page 1. So here, if you take a look at what happens in St. Andrews and West St. Paul, there's a Winnipeg upfront cost, okay? That upfront cost covered for their infrastructure to join in as part of the service sharing. And then there was the charge for the infrastructure related. So we would have an upfront cost for St. Andrews, but they would also have additional infrastructure that they'll be putting in, that they'll be building into theirs. So this would help to apply that, but that would be a negotiated agreement.
Okay, and to complicate it a little bit more, would we be charging per door or just a meter, what we're?
That's part of the negotiated agreement, whether we would charge for 1 meter and then they would pay us.
Okay.
That's what Winnipeg did. And they had an upfront cost and then a just 1 meter cost.
Put in a meter station and whatever it is. and-
Or another option can be that the municipalities get together, because water is, there's no other source outside of the RMs. You're not gonna get water from Winnipeg.
No.
And so sewer was available, but water will not be available due to the agreements that they have. So that maybe there's an opportunity to develop, like the Cartier Co-op, a proper kind of a cooperative to do that kind of service sharing and work as a region, because that's what's happening in the Pembina Valley
Right.
and all these other places, and that's how you're able to keep your costs low for your taxpayers and to be able to manage it well. Then, if it's a co-op, then they're responsible for managing it, borrowing and everything else, and then takes it away from the taxpayers to a certain extent and works like a proper utility.
Anything else?
Okay, so I'll read off the
Yeah, for bylaw 9.
resolved bylaw 9 of 2023 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 6 of 2016, the water and sewer utility expansion reserve as amended, be given second reading.
Madam Mover, please. Councillor Boulanger, Councillor Strang, seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, opposed, and that is carried. Okay, and we did say that third reading will be at the same time we do the third reading for bylaw number 8, which we hope will be the next meeting, so we can move on to bylaw number 10, and it's naming of a road.
Yes, Madam Mayor, this was a request by the developer off of Ferry Road here, where they were, thank you.
That was a very informative presentation. Great.
You're welcome. And it's recorded, so you can watch it again.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Welcome, take care. Okay, so this is the road name. The developer came forward to council, they received approval for naming the road into their subdivision. The challenge was that the subdivision had already been registered, so now what we're having to do is pass a bylaw to be able to register that. And so that's what we're bringing forward is same place in the subdivision just off of Ferry Road there.
I might add all the sewer connections, that's all done, and it was asphalted yesterday.
Yes, it's moving very quickly.
Yeah. Looks good.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it looks really good.
It's like you look, there's a field, then you look again and it's, whoa.
Yeah, it looks really good. So,
So, if I can read the resolution, Madam Mayor, if there's any other further comments. Sorry. Whereas subdivision S 22-2955 has been approved and is in the registration process, and whereas the plan of subdivision shows no name on the road and will be registered as a public road, and therefore be it resolved, Council of the Rural Municipality of St. Clements proceed to pass first reading of the road naming bylaw 10 of 2023, same place.
Can move, please. Council Bazarowicz, Council Corbett seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, opposed, and that is carried. And with that, I will ask that we stop the recording and have our lunch break, and we come back very shortly.
Oh, yeah.
I have to pick up my.
Yeah, we'll make sure we're